In this episode, I'm going to talk about burnout. I'm going to talk about what burnout is and, from my experience, how to deal with that situation. And I want to point out that this is all my own experience, my own point of view, and I have researched it and I have watched it happen to people around me. I haven't had it happen specifically to me, but I've certainly had degrees of burnout, which I'll talk about in a second. So first of all, what is burnout? Well, it's a level of stress where you just can't possibly go any further and you just kind of collapse. And there's definitely a scale of stress. So a bit of stress is quite good, I would say. It can be kind of motivating when you've got a deadline and you think, well, I've got to work towards that deadline, and it can be a good thing. But there's a scale of stress, and burnout's right at the end where you kind of just collapse and you can't do anything else. And there's kind of symptoms that go with burnout. There's an unrelenting stress, anxiety and depression, a lack of drive and motivation. And for artists, it's a lack of creativity. And for many people, it can be a lack of motivation for anything at all. Just getting up in the morning can seem like a real mission. Now, I've heard some people say that it doesn't exist and it's all in your head. I don't think that's very fair, because obviously there's different people and different experiences. And you could argue our whole life is in our head. We're very emotional creatures. That's kind of how we relate to each other, through emotions and feelings. So unless you're kind of a machine in the way you think and act, then you're going to be affected by emotions and you're going to get things like nerves and anxiety. And if you're really machine-like, then it makes you less empathetic, and sometimes you're not as easy to get along with. I'm thinking of sort of Sheldon Cooper from the Big Bang Theory. But even his character seems to have a lot of anxieties and difficulties and stresses. And I've never met anybody who's not affected in some way by stress. Some people cope with it better, but they're probably in a different situation in their life, so they can deal with that stress that's coming to them. So as I understand it, one really important thing about dealing with burnout is to recognize it when it starts and when it's beginning, and to realize what the causes are, and there might be quite a few. The main one is going to be this sort of pressure that's on you, and this can come from a variety of different situations. So if you're my age, you might have kids, and that can be stressful just in its own. Or in my profession, I see lots of teachers, and dealing with stress is a big issue. And often it's a combination of trying to deal with all these different things that causes burnout and overload. It's worth noting that overpressured people are less productive. In most countries, you have a 5-day working week. We certainly do in the UK, but actually in some countries they brought in a 4-day working week, and they're finding they're more productive through those 4 days than they are through 5. So working longer hours on something is not always the answer. And that's sometimes how people deal with stress. They just think, I'll spend more time on this problem and I'll find the solution and I won't be stressed anymore. Well, that's not always the case. So taking a break is actually vital. Now, some people are going to say, but I can't take a break, I've got responsibilities. And I do understand that. But try and always think you're going to be less productive the harder and longer you work. And you do need that break in order to work more productively in the hours that you have. In my experience, the solution to that is having really rigorous routines and being adaptable in those routines. And that's just as important as the routines, that you have adaptability. Otherwise you can get overstressed and you put too many things into your daily life, and it just gets an overload. So always be ready to change and adapt those routines, but try and keep routines, in my opinion. Don't pack too much into those routines, and realize when there is too much in the routines and you need to step back. And what will help you with that is not getting disappointed when you don't meet the targets set by your routines, but instead reflect on that and think, do I need to rebalance? Do I need to cut back? Or was that just a day where I was a bit lazy, perhaps? Which is sometimes the case. Sometimes I think, oh, I was a bit lazy today, let's pick it up tomorrow. But you do need to recognize the difference between laziness and tiredness. Sometimes you just think, oh, I cannot cope today, I'm going to take a break. And that's really important. It's not lazy. Don't beat yourself up about it. Now, I'm not suggesting this is the complete answer, but it is my answer to how I deal with stress and anxieties in my life. I personally have 3 main things that are absolutely vital to me to do every single day. And actually, when I don't meet one of these, that's when I start feeling a bit anxious. But I know as long as I meet these 3, then I'm fine and happy and balanced. And those 3 things are exercise, sleep, and diet. Now, this is going to be different for everybody out there. The amount of exercise you do is going to vary dependent on your level and your age and so on. But it's still important to get some exercise in the day, even if it's taking a dog for a walk, for example. Digital artists are notoriously bad for this, at sitting at their computer for hours on end, and then they think, I'm going to take a break, and they go on YouTube or something on their computer. You need to get up, you need to get out, you need to get fresh air into your lungs. Moving around is really important for releasing endorphins into the brain, and it actually gets your brain working harder, and you will become smarter after doing a bit of exercise. Apparently your brain is a bit like a muscle. It can kind of atrophy if it doesn't get enough oxygen to it. And in order to do that, you need to move around and exercise. As important as exercise is getting enough sleep. And if you are an insomniac, it may be something to do with exercise, possibly. It could be something to do with diet. These three things are intertwined quite closely. I'm not saying that's the complete answer for everybody, but I think it's a big answer for a lot of people. Apparently you should be getting about 8 hours of sleep a night. I kind of struggle to get 8 hours every night for some reason, I'm not sure why, but I do go to bed at a certain time in order that I can get 8 hours sleep. Sometimes I just wake up a bit early. Apparently if you're one of those people that can take naps in the day, that's really healthy. I can't seem to do it. I get really sick if I take a nap in the day. Shame. Now onto diet, and that's probably more contentious than sleep and exercise. It's a really tough one and a really interesting one. I have done loads and loads and loads of research on this, but I do think it's actually different for different people. But there are general rules to stick by. Now this is probably the hardest one to change. I have what most people would consider a really strict diet, but I'm really sure it's made a massive difference to my life. I used to suffer with quite a lot of energy issues, sort of highs and lows, and I think that caused a bit of depression at times, but then I'd sort of have these over-enthusiastic times as well. I also seem to suffer from quite a lot of allergies, and I get horrendous hay fever in the summer. Well, I used to anyway, and I used to get eczema just here on my arm and on the same place on the other arm for some reason. I tried loads of solutions, did lots of research, sort of gluten, lactose and so forth, but the one thing that made all the difference to me, and probably the hardest thing to give up, was sugar. Now I'm not about to tell you all to give up sugar because I know how difficult it is, but it would probably make a massive difference to your life. I still have sugar in fruits, but I don't eat too many, so I basically cut out all kind of refined carbs, so things like bread, pastas, and anything with sugar in, which is a bit of a nightmare if I'm honest, because pretty much everything has sugar in some kind of form. There's kind of things like dextrose and all these other things that are added that are basically sugar. But I'm not expecting everyone out there to follow this rigorous diet that I have, but I know it's made a massive difference to me. What I would say is just be really careful of how much sugar you are drinking and eating. I see a lot of students drinking energy drinks, and the government here in the UK are actually trying to put a ban in to stop the sale of energy drinks to under 16-year-olds, which shows how bad they must be. It's definitely the case that if you drink one of these, you will get an energy boost for about half an hour maybe if you're lucky, but then you will have this huge crash, and that's where these problems of stress and anxiety and depression can come, in my opinion. Now I'm not saying that's a solution for everybody, but I think it is a major factor in our society that we rely so much on sugar to give us this buzz and to make us work harder, but it will only work for short periods, and there will be a low to that high. And actually I think for me in my life, balancing out those highs and lows is really important, and it keeps you stable. And I keep using this term balanced, but that's really important to me. I've definitely had times in my life where I've been out of balance in terms of diet, exercise and sleep, and that really has upset me and caused lows and highs and a real lack of balance, and that's when I've felt the most anxious, stressed or depressed. So for me, every single day, good amount of rest, a good amount of exercise, and stick to that diet, for me anyway. Now what form they take is entirely up to you, but try and think about those three things. I think they're really vital. There are a few other things that I've heard about dealing with burnout and avoiding the causes of, and they are simple things like don't overload yourself, which I think is quite an easy thing to say, but very difficult to identify. And for me, it's more about adapting my routines and making sure I recognize when I'm overloaded. Possibly useful as well is thinking about your goals and having an aim. That can be quite nice because you can get some motivation from it, but don't get too stressed about those goals, obviously. To help you with that, you can keep a log of your progress. It's always nice to see how far you've come, because then that can spur you on to keep going. And a lot of these are just useful general everyday things to do. And there's quite a few tips out there on the internet that you can find quite easily. But for me, the most important, particularly in my life, are those three things: diet, exercise and sleep. I suppose I say sleep, but I do actually mean rest as well. So I think I better round things up there. Remember, this is from my perspective, my understanding and my life and what I've been through and what I've seen others go through. And I really appreciate that everybody's going through something different, and I'm by no means belittling someone who's going through burnout. by saying, oh, there's these 3 simple tricks. I do really think these things can help, but it is my perspective. Another thing that can be really useful is having a community around you. I say that again to introduce the Discord server if you haven't heard it already. I think it's well worth getting across there and joining in the chat, joining in the challenges and competitions. Introduce yourself, tell us about yourself. We've got a really wide-ranging global community of old people, young people, and people across the globe, which is quite exciting really, and I really enjoy that. Like I said, you can get involved with the challenges. The theme is fantasy at the moment, and you can actually do 2D art as well as 3D art this time. I don't think we've had any 2D entries just yet. The deadline is Monday at midnight, and the successful winners will get their picture up on the wall of fame. Do also post in the comments your experiences, your story, and if you've ever had to deal with burnout or you've helped someone through it, what are your tips and ideas? I'd love to hear from you. So I hope this helps, and thanks for watching.